Getting out of Nazi-occupied Europe is an almost impossible task if you're not a Nazi yourself. If you're Jewish, a member of the resistance, or a downed Allied airman, it's not only difficult, but mortally dangerous. As the war progresses, the Nazis tighten their fist closer and closer. Country after country goes from occupied, but self-administered, to military dictatorship. The last occupied country to suffer that fate is Denmark.
Denmark, home of Viking lore, the origin of much of what is perceived as Germanic culture, so celebrated by the Nazis and other Germanic nationalists. In August 1943, a country occupied by the German Reich for more than 3 years, but treated with kid gloves, as the Nazis firmly believe that the original home of Germanic greatness will eventually become a model protectorate in the new Nazi-dominated Europe.
Like other occupied lands that have already suffered the fate of being taken over as a dictatorship, the Danish response is increased resistance, which quickly leads to one of the greatest escape operations of the war to save the Danish Jews from the Holocaust. And that is where we begin our exploration of evading the Nazis in Western Europe. This is a World War II special episode about some spectacular escapes of World War II. I'm Spartacus Olsson.
And I'm Ian Sowden. And this special was made possible by Don't Nod, the publisher of a recently released game Gerda, A Flame in Winter, developed by the studio PortaPlay.
Now, Ian is the man who takes care of all of you out there, as he is the point of contact for the Time Ghost Army and runs our community management. He is also an avid history buff who plays a lot of historically themed games, including Gerda, A Flame in Winter. It's an unusual World War II game where your mission is not to fight the war or shoot up Nazis or whatever, but to navigate the treacherous social and civil life of occupied Denmark in order to locate and rescue Gerda's husband, a resistance operative who has disappeared into the Gestapo labyrinth of abuse.
Yeah, I have to say that one of the most appealing aspects of playing the game is how it gives you a very realistic feeling of how tricky life was in occupied Europe. To succeed, you can't just fight your way forward. You have to play the game with all the caution of a person living at the time. Trust no one at first glance, but quickly identify who is a friend and who is an enemy. Collaborate just enough not to trigger suspicion, but not so much that you endanger other people's lives, and choose carefully when to spring into action.
It's easy to imagine life under occupation as a black and white world of Nazis versus resistance, but that wasn't how it was. Life went on, and most people just tried to hunker down, stay out of the way, and survive. Hidden inside that mass of people were the sympathizers for both sides, collaborators and resistors. And it was incredibly difficult, often impossible, to know who was who. So, with the darkness of war came a fog of fear, suspicion, and secrecy that settled itself across the occupied cities, towns, and villages. Ever present were the occupiers, enforcing the awareness that freedom was no more, and that there was a tangible threat if you strayed from the narrow path that the Nazis set up for the occupied to navigate. In that opaque world, German Führer Adolf Hitler issued the Nacht- und Nebel-Erlass, literally Night and Fog Decree, on December 7, 1941. This instructed the Gestapo and SS to seize anyone suspected of resistance, deport them to Germany, where they would be tried, executed if found guilty, or simply held in concentration camps if their guilt was uncertain. Next of kin are not informed of their family members' fate, who simply disappear into the foggy night. It applied at first to France, Norway, and the Benelux countries, but as of September 1943, Danes also have to fear to fall victims to this extrajudicial imprisonment, with the expected consequences of maltreatment, torture, and often death.
And in the game, that's exactly what happened to Gerda's husband. She has no clue what exactly has happened to him, except that the Gestapo has arrested him, suspect of sabotaging a factory. With little knowledge and herself not a member of resistance, she has to try prime out of the hands of the German Gestapo, a task that will require diplomacy, cunning, and a great care, but also the help of others willing to risk their lives to save a stranger.
That is, of course, a fate that millions of men, women, and children face from the onset of war, especially anyone of Jewish heritage or considered Jewish by the Nazis. By the summer of 1943, almost all Jews in Poland and the Western Soviet Union have been murdered, and the few who remain have been enslaved for the German war effort. In June that year, the Nazis also began deporting Jews from Western Europe to the death factories and slave camps in greater numbers. Now, in Denmark, this doesn't happen to the slightly fewer than 8,000 Danes who are Jewish. So far, using the little bit of autonomy they have, the Danish government has refused to impose most heavy restrictions on the Jews. They've even prosecuted and punished anti-Semitic attacks. The German occupiers have grudgingly accepted that as part of their plan to turn Denmark into a model client state. But now in September, as the Germans have taken full control, the Jews are in great danger. It is now many Danes show their true colors as they spring into action to save them from certain death. Now, I will get into this in my regular War Against Humanity episode as it happens, but here's a short summary.
On September 11th, a German diplomatic attaché, George Ferdinand Duckwitz, secretly opposed to the Nazis, informs the Danish administration that the Danish Jews are about to be deported. Some civil servants spontaneously begin organizing hiding places, calling in favors from friends and family, and the spontaneous action soon becomes a coordinated plan. By early October, most Jews have disappeared to such hiding places, and Duckwitz tries to convince the Swedes to take them in, but he gets refused. He then goes on to Berlin to achieve a stay on deportations via the official channels, but to no avail. Under pressure from, among others, Niels Bohr, world-famous Danish physicist with Jewish ancestry, the Swedish government then changes course, and on October 2nd, publicly announces that they will receive any Danish Jews and give them Swedish nationality.
An operation involving thousands of people now begins to get the Jews in hiding to Sweden via boats. The fishermen or boat owners charge between 1,000 and 50,000 Danish crowns for the passage. In total, the operation costs 20 million crowns, half of which comes from the refugees themselves and half of which is collected by a fundraising campaign among wealthy Danes opposed to Nazism. From October 2nd till the end of the month, hidden in train cars, on ferry boats, in the hulls of fishing boats, below decks of pleasure boats, on kayaks, in canoes, and rowing boats, from ports all over the northernmost coast of Denmark. In the dead of the night, they set out on the trip across Öresund that takes about an hour with a motorized vessel. During the crossings, only 23 fall victim to the waves. Some 280 are captured and 7,220 escape to safety in Sweden. 580 stay in Denmark in hiding or under special permits.
But that doesn't mean that every Dane is involved, let alone actively supports the operation. On one occasion, 80 Jewish Danes are captured after a girl in love with a German soldier reveals that they are hiding in a church. The game reflects this really well by showing that the danger that Gerda faces doesn't just come from Germans, but that she also has to circumnavigate collaborators, informants, but still, it's a spectacular escape.
Indeed. But while they do brave the dangers of a sea crossing, it's relatively safe and quite short. The only other way to get to Sweden involves a long, dangerous journey.
One of them is Norwegian resistance operative Sven Somme, who for a few weeks in mid-1944 becomes the Nazis' most wanted man. They need to get this man before he escapes with a treasure trove of information about their naval operations, atomic bomb plans, and strategy for defending Norway once or if the Allies attack.
Somme's brother, Jakob, was one of the operatives who tried and eventually succeeded to sabotage the heavy water plant in Telemark to sabotage the German atomic weapon program. Jakob is captured in October 1942, tortured, sent to concentration camp, and executed in March 44. Meanwhile, Sven continues his work with the resistance, carrying out sabotage and espionage for the Allies. In June 44, he is caught red-handed when photographing a German naval installation. The evening of his capture, he manages to slip out of his handcuffs and escape. With only an hour's head start, in dress shoes and indoor clothes, he heads for the mountains.
And soon, he has hundreds of German soldiers with search dogs on his trail. To hide his tracks, he walks in ice-cold mountain creeks, using the rocks instead of soft ground as much as he can, and after a few days, farm family takes him in and give him a pair of mountain shoes. For almost 2 months, he evades the Germans, and then after climbing, walking, and running, even crossing snow-covered glaciers, he finally makes it to Sweden and to safety. Some 2,000 kilometers further south, another mountain range becomes a virtual highway for anyone looking to escape the Nazis and fascists in France into neutral country.
Now, I've spoken about the failed and successful escapes of Jews in Eastern Europe. Around 1 million Jews escape with the Red Army or as part of the Red Army when Germany invades in the summer of 1941. After that, escape gets difficult. Behind the front line, millions die at the hands of the German Nazis, their allies and local collaborators. In Western Europe, it is much the same. Difficulties compounded when Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy soon control or occupy almost all of the western half of Europe. By then, the only path to escape beyond the Norwegian mountains and Öresund is across the Pyrenees into neutral Spain, a boat from the French Mediterranean coast, or from the small stretch of the western coast in Bretagne, France, where the Atlantic Wall is not built up. The two seaways are almost impossible to use as they involve getting to heavily guarded ports and then traveling long stretches of treacherous water. So the Pyrenees becomes the preferred route. The need to get downed Allied airmen who have avoided capture out and back into service soon gains Allied financial support. Belgian resistance members go south to make the first route in 1941, and from there it grows into a cottage military operation, employing 15,000 resistance operatives by war's end. Two routes, the Comet line in the west, from Bayonne to San Sebastian, and the Pat line from Perpignan or Toulouse to Barcelona in the east, are used. It's a task with extremely high risk. Crossing the mountains on the animal trails and footpaths they use is in and of itself a mortal danger. And then there's the constant cat-and-mouse game with the Gestapo, the Wehrmacht, and French collaborationist police. Out of the 12 leading operatives who initially run the Comet line, only 3 are still operational by late 1943. The others are either dead or in concentration camps.
One of the dilemmas they face is to choose between fulfilling their mission and saving themselves, their families, and their loved ones. A choice that will often include choosing one life over another person's death. In the game, Goethe faces exactly these dilemmas. Now, solving moral conundrums is an unusual concept for games in general, but especially one that is about World War II. What Goethe does especially well is to present the war on a personal level, in as much of its historical complexity as possible. You get a rare glimpse of how life can get out of control when living under such difficult circumstances, and how much you're at the mercy of chance, the will of others, and the support of virtual strangers.
Which, back in real life, in the Pyrenees, is very much what happens when some of the captured become the subject of their own rescue operations. Florentino Gocochea, codenamed simply Florentino, a Basque smuggler, joins the Comet line, becoming its principal guide by April 42. In July 44, he is shot by German border guards, his leg shattered. He manages to ditch all his compromising documents, but is arrested and taken to hospital in Bayonne.
A few days later, 2 French-speaking resistance operatives arrive at the hospital posing as Gestapo men. They convince the Wehrmacht guards that they are the real thing and cart Florentino off to freedom in a wheelchair. He too survives the war, and 30 years after it is over, no longer fearing arrest for his smuggling work, he reveals his identity and is received by Queen Elizabeth and awarded the George Medal, while the French will elevate him to the Legion of Honor.
But it's not only airmen who take refuge in the mountains on the Spanish-French border. And it is not only in Denmark that massive rescue operations of thousands of Jews take place. In many Pyrenean villages, Jews, sometimes entire families, will find refuge among the Basque farmers. Chief among them is the hamlet Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. This remote village comes together as one to harbor Jews fleeing persecution, often children without parents. Many will head out to Spain, but a few hundred will live out the war here. Whenever the Germans get near the place, the shepherds signal using the horns they usually use to call the sheep in, and any Jews in the village quickly escape to hide in the nearby forest. Over 5,000 Jews will be saved here alone.
While they all have a long, arduous path to get across the border, there was one route to escape the Nazis into neutral country that was not much more difficult than going to the bathroom in your own home.
Well, you did have to get to that place undetected, which was pretty tricky. But once there, you were golden. It is the Hotel Arbès, situated on the German and Swiss border. Actually, it saddles the border so that inside the hotel you can go from one country to the other by simply stepping through a door. The owners of the hotel will have a more than contentious relationship with the Gestapo, who watch the house like hawks, but often miss a potential escapee entering. Anytime they give chase and burst into the German side of the house, they will only get as far as the door to Switzerland. Here they will promptly be reminded that going through that door will launch an international diplomatic incident.
It's easy to forget the intimacy of a war. People standing off face to face in a hallway. A situation that does not involve guns, barking dogs, brutal violence. For most people, that was how the war played out. A slow navigation through some very complicated, dark, and scary times. Again, this is a point where Goethe, A Flame in Winter, excels. It's an immersive experience where you gradually discover how it might have felt to be caught in the turmoil of war, fought actively far away, but always still on your very porch, or just on the other side of a hallway door.
Now, coming and going through a door is one thing. What do you do when it is bars and a window that stops you? That is the case for some boys in Denmark who are members of the Churchill Club, one of the first resistance groups to form in Denmark in Aalborg after German invasion and occupation. The members are students and teenagers. Their mission is to be a general nuisance to the German occupiers by vandalizing German property. Most of them are, however, caught already in May 1942. Again, due to the lenient treatment of Denmark, the Germans allow the Danish authorities to put them in regular prisons. In September, most of them are transferred to Nyborg prison. But 3 boys, brothers Alf and Kai Hulberg and Knud Hornbro, are left in Aalborg prison. They are moved together into a cell previously held by 2 of their comrades. They, in turn, have been working for months to pry loose one of the window bars, replacing it with a dummy bar.
Then, shortly after their transfer, a new wave of vandalism against the Germans sweeps all across Aalborg, like when a Wehrmacht Mercedes drives itself at full speed off the pier down into a harbor. It is, of course, the 3 Churchill boys who are escaping prison every night to do mischief. Each time they leave a note behind saying, "Please don't call the police, we will be back in the morning." And that is exactly what they do. They return to their cell as if nothing has happened, and for 19 nights in a row, the ruse continues. Then they are caught, however, sent off to a German prison, but not a concentration camp. All the members of the Churchill Club survive the war, after which they'll be personally invited to England to meet the man who they took their name from, Winston Churchill.
Now, these are only glimpses showing a fraction of many, many events of the war where ordinary men and ordinary women had to rise to meet challenges they never imagined in their wildest nightmares. Moments when humanity prevailed, when all of humanity was on the precipice between good and evil. It was a personal war, forcing people to adapt and change during a cold night. The only heat was from a world in flames. That is the reality that Gerda lives in, that you can visit and experience, to not just gain some more understanding, but also be excited and entertained by a well-written historical narrative that brings back to life the heroism of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances.
As we've mentioned, this video was made possible and inspired by Goethe, A Flame in Winter. The story is inspired by real events experienced by one of the developer's family, and it shows in the game. It's a refreshing perspective of a game to have on World War II. After playing endless shoot-'em-up titles, Goethe stands out as an illustration of World War II for what it was, an emotionally confusing and overwhelmingly civilian experience away from the front lines. It's very easy to navigate for people who are new to video games, so download the game with the link in the description, and we recommend playing it a few times through to really explore the characters, conversations, and relationships that it offers.
Never forget.